Hello, everyone. Just making
People
sure
are
audio is
still,
working. It's kind of
lots of people are still coming in.
all right.
Hi, folks.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, we got quite a crowd already. All right, there's still people coming in. I'm gonna wait one more minute. Usually the last of the late entrants are getting in about 3 minutes after.
Yeah, I think we're expecting a few more from Spotify also. And I don't know if this crowd, if you all are familiar with each other, but I haven't seen any of you before, but I'm from Spotify anyways.
Hey there. Yeah, I mean, we could definitely do a quick round of intros if people want to say hi. So I guess you've gone first, but I can introduce myself too. I'm Mike Beamer. I work at Dynatrace. Been involved in OpenFeature basically since the beginning.
Yeah, I'll go next. Do an introduction. I'm Todd Bart. I've been involved with the project slightly a little bit less long than Mike, I guess. But yeah, happy to be here. Also, work at Dynatrace.
All right. Possibly it's
Yep,
me for
so-
going next. I'm Eric Lacher. I'm working for Sedar, a US company in the claims business, and we are exploring introducing feature flags in our applications now. And I came across your project, and I'm very interested in the initiative you're discussing today.
Anybody else who wants to introduce themselves? Why don't we do it this way? Just use the reaction, the raise hand reaction, if you want to introduce yourself, and I'll call you out. That way we can try and be efficient about it. Ivar, go ahead.
I was the fastest. Nice. So I'm Ivar. I'm the creator of Unleash, also the founder of the company that brings the commercial version of Unleash to companies.
Camille, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kamil. I'm from Google, and we are from the team that is doing experimentation for Google Cloud.
Conrad, I think I saw you next, but I'm losing track.
I think I was the most recent person, but hi, I'm Conrad. I've been on and off joining OpenFeature, small startup kind of trying to tackle similar problems called Leco.
Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan O'Brien. I'm an ecosystem engineer with LaunchDarkly.
David?
Hi everyone, I'm David. I'm also from Leco, working with Conrad on a configuration platform and wanted to learn more about OpenFeature.
Ryan, go ahead.
Hey, I'm Ryan. I work with LaunchDarkly. I've been working with OpenFeature a while, working on providers and also some contribution to SDKs.
Vindu?
I'm Kavindu. I've been working with the OpenFeature project for about a year. I maintain some libraries and SDKs for the OpenFeature community, and I'm from Dynatrace as well. Yeah.
Janik, I can't remember if it's Janik or Yannick. Please correct me.
It's Yannick. I'm software engineer from Google. I'm from the same team as Kamil. Experimentation for Google Cloud.
Thomas?
Yeah, I'm Thomas. I'm working in a company called Adevinta, and my side project is called Go Feature Flag, is a feature flag solution, open source one.
Simon?
Hi folks, I'm Simon. I'm one of the engineers with Unleash.
Okay. I think that might be everyone. If I missed anyone, please. Oh, Louise, I don't think you introduced yourself yet.
Hey, Bob, how's it going? So I'm Luis from Brazil. I've been exploring OpenFeature for the last 1 month. I think that's it.
All right, cool. Glad to see so many people here. Some new faces, some not. I'm trying to structure things without without being too prescriptive here, because I do want this meeting to be productive. I know everybody hates meetings where people just talk and there's no concrete results. So I'm trying to focus on getting some concrete results here. So for those of you who aren't familiar, there's been this discussion for quite a long time now about a couple new initiatives for the project. So right now we're really focused on kind of the I guess client side of feature flag evaluation, so SDKs and integrations, those kinds of things. That's really where the project has spent all of its energy so far. More recently, like I said, we've been talking about these ideas of a common flag definition, so a specification for that, and that could potentially lead to a standard. As well as a flag evaluation protocol, like a wire protocol for evaluating flags. Both these have got sporadic interest, but we haven't dedicated real significant time into standardizing these things or specifying them. So what I'm hoping to get out of this meeting is a better understanding of what the goals around these two initiatives are, who would be interested in helping to drive those efforts. That's a practical concern for me as a maintainer in the project. And I'd like to really understand some potential POCs that we could do to try and validate that these are things we actually want. Before we go further, Ryan, I see your hand is still up. Is there something you wanted to say, or is it just
It was a remnant. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, raise your hand at any time. I'm going to try and keep an eye on people, but let's try not to talk over each other because there's a decent amount of people here. Yeah, so that's kind of how I'm going to set the stage. Stacy, actually, if you have quick access to it, could you add to the agenda there a link to the actual GitHub issue that talks about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I did it at the very top, but I will.
Oh, perfect. Okay, yeah, if it's there, that's fine. So, yeah, for the uninitiated, there's an issue that I made quite a while ago, kind of summarizing these things. There's also lots of discussion floating around the org. So I think there's some links to there, but I think the meat of it is right here. So my next point I was gonna talk about some potential POC projects, because I honestly think doing some POCs, however they look, is going to help elucidate the actual value here. But before I move on to that, does anybody have anything they want to add at the outset? Any input want to add now? Ivar?
Yeah, I would like to add an agenda point to the POC. So at Unleash, we actually have been doing quite a lot in this area already, and we are running it in production already. So it would be helpful if we could share some of our learnings so far in our internal POC in this exact regard, looking into how we can open source a protocol for this. And obviously, really independent of the Unleash protocol, but still serving our needs, of course. So we have done quite a lot in this area.
Yeah, that's excellent. I know the Unleash project is quite mature. So I wasn't aware that you guys actually had a standard, a protocol, a wire protocol. Is it for evaluation of feature flags? Is that the idea?
Exactly, a DSL for how you would configure or kind of define that in an independent way, and also an engine that we cross-compile to most programming languages already, and we are running it in production.
Very cool. Yeah, that could be a really good basis for POCs. Yeah, so it looks like somebody already added that point, and a link. Yeah, Yggdrasil, I think, is what you're referring to, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I haven't had time to really look into it, but I definitely think it's a useful idea, and I would be happy to look into it. It could form the basis of a standard. I guess from the OpenFeature side, where I'll start is we do have Flag D, which is a fairly minimalist project. that does some of these same things. I want to make clear that I'm not advocating that any of the stuff already defined in flag D kind of has to be a basis for any ongoing discussion. But it is useful to have something that actually works and exists in the real world if you're doing POCs. So you can consider flag D for those purposes. But it's really only a starting point. It doesn't have to be a it doesn't have to form the basis of any of these new specifications, whether or not it's the evaluation or the definition. Okay, first I want to talk about the wire protocol. It's a little bit, it's the slightly older idea. It's been around a little bit more. There was a really interesting Slack discussion, I think about 3 months ago now, maybe a little bit longer. And one of the main things that was identified there as a challenge is this hypothetical scenario. So you have some kind of hosted application, some self-hosted application. Jenkins is a kind of a common example that you're running in your infrastructure as an org. And you want to leverage OpenFeature. Well, that would kind of the challenge there would be that even if Jenkins kind of included the OpenFeature SDK inside their code base, Jenkins, the maintainers of Jenkins, they don't know what backend you're using, right? They don't know if you're using a vendor like Flagsmith or CloudBees or LaunchDarkly or whatever, or if you're using GoFeature Flag or Unleash, whatever it is. So you could build some kind of plugin system that would allow you to plug in the provider for that backend. The challenges that come with that is that you need a plugin system. So whatever application it is you're interested in running, Jenkins, something else, continue to use the Jenkins example, that application has to have that pluggability. And I think that's a really unreasonable thing to take for granted. I mean, it's a little bit more reasonable in Java, but it's not reasonable in a lot of other languages and frameworks and self-hosted applications. So one of the potential benefits of a wire protocol is that hypothetically Jenkins could embed this standard provider, this standard adapter that would be compatible with this wire protocol. And then whatever backend you're using, as long as it's implementing this wire protocol, you can evaluate feature flags so that you can then turn on features in this hosted application that the developers for this application have baked into it. So I think there's a decent amount of value there. I guess you could kind of consider it like a feature flag equivalent of built-in OpenTelemetry support in this hosted application. And I think the prospect of an open source project such as Jenkins baking in a particular provider, from a particular vendor is pretty unreasonable. So this kind of is a new paradigm for this sort of thing. But we need to define this evaluation protocol for this to work. I guess I'm giving all that background because one of the things that I would love to see is a POC kind of like this, whether it uses flag D or some other kind of open standard where there's some kind of hosted application that would use some kind of wire protocol, whether it's a brand new one that we kind of made up and then have some backend system for it. I would just really like to see that. I think that would be an interesting POC. And I don't know if people have other suggestions beside Jenkins, but getting kind of traction here in a working demo, I think would be exciting, especially if it could work with multiple backends. If there's a vendor that's interested in trying to support this demo, or an open source project like GoFeature Flag or Unleashed. So I'll stop talking for now for that point. I don't know if anybody has any feedback or input on that. Andreas?
Yes. Yeah. So I'm curious, in the POC you mentioned, it sounds interesting, but would that necessarily include, you said evaluation, would it work with just the wire protocol as well, right? As a first step, or?
Well, the wire protocol we've been talking about is an evaluation protocol. So it's not a protocol to deliver a flag definition. I think that's really something that you could do any number of ways. I think that's a less complex issue, actually delivering a flag definition. But a wire protocol that does a flag evaluation, I think, is what we're talking about here. The standardizing of a definition, if I'm understanding your question correctly, is kind of the next point, which is, also a totally interesting point. But I don't think it's quite the same thing as like a protocol that does remote flag evaluation. I hope that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's the logical first step.
Yeah, Thomas?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I'm happy to contribute on that, like to be able to be like one of the remote evaluation thing in Go Feature Flag. I think it's pretty straightforward. We just need to define this wire protocol, which is probably the hard step here. If FlagD has one, and I think maybe the one from FlagD is good enough. I don't know.
I think that's an interesting point too. I mean, maybe one of the things that we could also kind of come out of this meeting with is a list of potential protocols. So we could talk about FlagD. I am interested in Yggdrasil, like especially if it's being used in production. FlagD has some production usage as well. But I think it's good to evaluate all these options, and then we can see, and we can have POCs that do multiple. But I think the value of the POC is kind of, it's larger if we can at least decide to POC the same wire protocol, even if it's not the same protocol we end up using, because then we can try and do this switching and see, okay, can you reasonably deploy this application and have it have flags evaluated in these multiple backends? So I think we might need to have a follow-up discussion or an offline discussion, kind of comparing these possible candidates, and maybe we can list some as part of this first point. Sounds like we already have two, which is FlagD and the Unleash standard Yggdrasil. Conrad, I think you were next.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess I'm wondering if when it comes to the wire protocol, like I know there was a bit of discussion about like gRPC or RPC REST and like stuff like that. And I don't know if we want to get that technical, but one thing we've seen that's useful, which it doesn't have a ton of cross-language support, is Connect from the Buff folks. It can expose stuff both over REST and gRPC. So that's one option. And then I guess my second thought is, I'm curious, a lot of these use cases seem to be supporting these open source projects. And I wonder if for those like Jenkins and we have a few other folks that we've discussed, like Build Buddy and a few other folks who would seem like they would want to do similar stuff because they ship things to their clients to run internally, and they might not be clients of a feature flagging provider. Where is remote evaluation the most tenable thing, or would people actually prefer local evaluation? And I guess it's hard to say exactly depending on these projects' needs, but that's where I would be. If we can figure out a simple definition on the flag evaluation protocol, then that seems, I would argue, to me more straightforward, and the flag definition seems way more contentious to me, but that's just my personal opinion.
I agree, and I won't speak for Ryan, but I think he said something similar in a thread, and I kind of agree. I think the flag definition is more technically challenging. Like, I think doing an evaluation protocol is a lighter task, an easier lift, but I do want to get into the flag definition. We'll do that soon. I just want to make sure that we hit enough on this evaluation protocol first. I also did want to mention in response to you, Conrad, yes, Connect is great. We actually do use that in FlagD for our evaluation protocol, just as an FYI. I think Mike was next.
Yeah, basically just want to reiterate that there's the wire protocol stuff, I think, has a lot of potential negatives too. So like, but maybe we could do it quickly, but I wouldn't focus a ton of effort into it necessarily. I think the flag definition and in-process evaluator is probably a better bang for our buck. So just kind of my thoughts on the topic there. If we can agree to, that's the right direction, it may be a better use of time.
Brian, I think you were next.
Yep. Yeah, I'll make an attempt at speaking for myself. But my problems, like my thoughts around flag definition, aren't necessarily the technical challenges associated with it. I think there are, technical challenges with it. I more question the structural usefulness of it or consistency of it. So with everything that OpenFeature does right now, there might be cases where you can't achieve feature parity between vendors, but for an individual vendor, the behavior is consistent, basically, right? Like by lack of feature parity, you still get consistent results with just using that vendor. So the feature parity missing things are like, maybe there's APIs on the clients for events that aren't there, or that kind of thing. But like at a fundamental level, you take a context, you evaluate it, and you get a result. And that result will be consistent with that vendor, regardless of which SDK you use. And it will be consistent with other things that provider does. So if I use LaunchDarkly as an example, you can look at all of our contexts in the dashboard. You can see every variation, how they're going to evaluate for a flag and why they're going to do that. And I think that most approaches to a flag definition lose that consistency because the parity becomes part of the evaluation algorithm, not just your API surface, right? So if you have a flag definition and it doesn't support the full rule set of the vendor, and it doesn't support the exact same hashing algorithm or indexing properties in the exact same way, then it means that backend system or evaluation to evaluation, like if you do have a multi-tier system, you have a server client, evaluations might not be the same between them, or you might not be able to deterministically see how your flag is going to evaluate in the way that you can now, which is different than other aspects of OpenFeature.
Yeah, I kind of think that's inarguable. Like I said, I agree. I think it would come down to whether or not vendors see enough value in the proposal that they're interested in tolerating that and essentially segmenting their user base between the two systems, which I understand might not be desirable, if I'm understanding your comment correctly. But I don't fundamentally disagree with your point. I don't know if anybody else has input on that.
I was getting ready to say the same thing as Ryan, but he said it a lot better than I would have done. Like, I think it's probably vendors already have a really hard time making the flag evaluation consistent between like Android and iPhone, or, web or whatever else, but having basically like the native evaluation regime and then the open feature evaluation regime, I think is going to be really, really confusing for users. I think you'd basically just have to be all in on one or the other. Like for a given user, you'd have to just be like either using the whatever vendor version of flag evaluation or the open feature one. So it feels like I personally, I think that like maybe that's just the way it is, and I suspect if we went that route, then there would be this kind of bifurcation where people would either be using like open feature evaluation or their vendor of choice's evaluation, and maybe that's not terrible, but I think we should be just kind of go into it with if we decide to do the evaluation ourselves, then like as part of open feature, then I think that's just, we should go into it with that kind of eyes open, that there's not going to be some magical land where you just ship this definition and like LaunchDarkly and Unleashed and whatever else, they all evaluate the same way. I just don't think that's possible, but maybe it's still worth doing. The other quick point I want to make is that I'm still, and I made this point when we talked about the wire protocol before, I'm not at all convinced that the Jenkins use case is actually really a use case that needs solving. I just don't feel the need to configure the feature flags of Jenkins. It just it doesn't really feel like useful. I think there might be other use cases that I'm not thinking of, but that Jenkins one I feel like is kind of like just a weird example. So yeah, that's maybe just an aside.
I mean, yeah, I think Jenkins might be a bad example. It's just the first thing that comes to mind when I think of a self-hosted application. But like Confluence, for example, like it's huge and is more of like a UI focused tool.
Yeah, but
I digress.
Anywhere, I feel like anywhere where there's really is a need to configure it, they have a configuration system, and I don't think there's that much advantage. Me as a person who's who's using Confluence, I don't think there's that much advantage of saying like, oh, it's great, I can manage my Confluence settings in the same place that I manage my internal application settings. It just doesn't feel like that's a huge win from a feature flagging thing. I can't see the scenario of like, it's wonderful, I can do controlled rollout of my Confluence stuff to my internal users, or I can do A/B testing on Confluence. Like it just feels like a bit of a. I guess what I'm saying is I would for me personally, I'd love a better example that kind of illustrates the value of it, so we can kind of test the value of it versus the Jenkins thing seems, or the conference or whatever, seems a bit kind of spurious to me. It's just my 2 cents.
Fair enough. Apologize again because I'm not sure who raised their hand first, but I'm gonna go to David.
Yeah, sure. So what I wanted to kind of put my thoughts out there on in terms of, I think, continuing Ryan and Pete's discussion is in terms of like the concern of the bifurcation. I wonder if the non-deterministic behavior between like OpenFeature's valuation and the vendor's valuation would be like a significant problem if you're a user interested in using, OpenFeature's provided tools. Then you probably aren't, either you're in a stage of migrating from the vendor specific tools to OpenFeature, or you started with OpenFeature, which means I think there's a very low chance you're going to be kind of mixing the different tools within the scope of one project or one system. So I wonder if that's as big of a concern that we should be worried about for the OpenFeatures definition. But yeah, well, interested to hear other people's thoughts as well.
Ivar?
Yeah, thanks. So I just want to echo what Pete said. I think we should work on the use case for the wire protocol in Jenkins. So we do a very similar thing inside of Unleash. So obviously we use Unleash to control Unleash, but in terms of the open source, like the flags that goes in there, they're either on or off. Like, so you can turn stuff on yourself. And I would assume for a lot of these kind of examples that we currently talk about, it's like you turn it on for a company or you turn it off for a company. And then the need for a very fancy algorithm to evaluate that might be less, but it could be use cases, of course, but we should have clear use cases where you actually need more advanced configuration for that. If not, it's just kind of configuration in that tool itself. The other point I wanted to make is around, so we already have looked into how kind of DSL for feature flagging can look like, and would it be okay if we could do a small presentation on what we have been doing with Yggdrasil, what it is? It's not the same as FlagD. FlagD would be more similar to our Unleash Edge, which runs Yggdrasil as an engine. But Yggdrasil itself is the DSL and the engine to kind of evaluate that DSL. And maybe we could share some of our learnings and what we have been doing so far and why we are doing it. And obviously the biggest reason for us is to create consistency and make it easier to maintain this across programming languages. But maybe you, Simon, if it's okay with everyone, it's just a few slides just to give everyone a context on what we have been doing and what we have been learning so far. And maybe that could be helpful for the discussions. And yeah, take it away. Is that okay, or?
I think for this meeting, it might take up more time than we have. I'm open to, if we kind of get done the discussions like these existing items, I'm open to seeing that. The other thing I would say is maybe next week at our community meeting, you could do that as well, where we have like a dedicated time on an agenda for it. I'm a little bit hesitant to spend too much time on that specific, investigating any specific implementation right now.
Okay, it was just to provide some context on what is possible and all of that, but that's okay. I think also kind of from the vendor perspective, looking at, I'm from Unleash and we have other vendors here, LaunchDarkly at least, and a few others. And I think also we have to consider kind of the obligations to be a vendor. Like we have thousands of companies already trusting Unleash in production, and we also, for our paying customers, we have obligations, SLA requirements, and of course, it would be very fantastic if we ended up with a shared protocol for this and a shared SDK. But I think this is a stepwise kind of approach. This is not something that happens the next year. Maybe it's 2-5 years type of approach. I think what we need to land on first is kind of the engine, the protocol, how we define stuff, and then we will gradually move towards something there where we can share everything. But this is a lengthy, and also just imagine when we talk to customers, when we land large enterprises, going out and just have them, we don't own the SDK. You should just use this open SDK that is brand new. It would be a very hard sell for us as a vendor. And I think this goes for all vendors. So I think we just have to have that in mind, that this is not something we shift tomorrow. It's kind of, we need to do a stepwise and a careful evaluation over time if this is the right approach. Is kind of, at least from a vendor perspective, how we think about this.
Yeah, certainly no disagreement there. I especially understand with like production workloads, there's going to be hesitation to adopt something that's new and untested. That makes sense. Ruzbe, I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah, close enough. Thanks. I want to echo some of the concerns that Ryan and Ivar had around the flag definition language. I think the more I've been thinking about where that would end up, like especially with it being able to support various like vendor specific evaluation intricacies. Like I work on Spotify's project Confidence, which does a lot of stuff in the evaluation code where we make sure that we have like mutually exclusive allocations, and we do a lot of stuff with bucket ranges and hashing, which would probably be hard to ship into a very generic evaluation language. That said, I think it would be interesting to look at what's possible to do with maybe taking the evaluation protocol, wire protocol idea, and shifting that up into a provider, a standard provider that might be a host for WebAssembly environment, or finding a standard on that level rather. So vendors could, in that case, they would ship a WebAssembly module containing their evaluation algorithm, basically, but that would be able to run in a standard provider, so to say, like in the SDK. I think that venue is interesting to look at. So I just wanted to raise that here.
Interesting point. Yeah. Eric, I think you've been waiting for a while.
Thanks. Yeah, so I want to put a comment on what was said before, that CI/CD pipelines are not a good example of Jenkins. I think we don't even need an example here. If I get it correctly, having a wire protocol, a standardized wire protocol, would get rid of the necessity to have a provider implemented in all kinds of different languages. So if you talk about server-side evaluation, that would just vanish this necessity, and I think that's a huge advantage.
Brian, I think you've been waiting to speak as well. Oh, okay.
Oh, was that? Sorry.
Sorry, I said Ryan. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had a couple things I wanted to bring up. So one of them was, I think, for David about the if you're choosing to use OpenFeature. So, like, as a scenario, imagine if I'm going to use OpenFeature and you don't have feature flags right now, and your vendor dropping effectively, right? When you look at that feature metric, like the matrix of features, that matrix of features may not apply to you, and that because of the fact that you were using OpenFeature and you want to use it this specific way, if we're talking about like a flag definition language. So even if you're like, okay, well, I'm already doing OpenFeature, so I'll use this subset of features, that is already a problem, right? Like if you want to say, oh, I'm going to use this vendor because it supports experimentation, and the experimentation product doesn't actually work when you use an OpenFeature flag definition language. So it's not just the fact that you have two concrete implementations that behave different, it's the actual, your core functionality has to be even potentially marketed differently, right? Then the other thing was around the wire protocol, which is like, I wanted to maybe the understanding of how that is serviced might be different. So this is going back, previous speaker, what is the server side of that protocol potentially, right? And I think you could think about it as this is a thing that just replaces a vendor's wire protocol, which it probably wouldn't. It's more of a we choose, let's say, the Go SDK for OpenFeature. You write an application that services the wire protocol, and then every vendor who has a Go provider can use that, implementation or whatever, right? You just, if in the Jenkins use case, if we were doing that, you run Jenkins, you run another container that has your OpenFeature provider setup that's using LaunchDarkly, right? Which again, the fact that those two things are in different languages doesn't matter. Any vendor can now get support for using that wire protocol, right?
Yeah, if I'm understanding you correctly, this is one of the potential visions of FlagD, which hasn't really come into being too much, but that FlagD could basically be used as like a more or less a proxy where you could plug in a provider owned by a vendor and then have FlagD do this evaluation maybe as a sidecar to your workload or something like that. If I'm understanding you correctly, that's more or less what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think making it be actually, it's instead of a application of OpenFeature, a feature of OpenFeature is an important differentiator, especially from a vendor viewpoint, where FlagD is maybe not just that, it's other things, right? So I think that's kind of an important potential distinction reason we'd want to do this versus just letting FlagD do that.
Right. Pete?
It kind of seems, I'm just looking at some of the comments people have made and in the chat as well. I think what the conversation to me makes me think that if we go the route of this kind of wire protocol and flag definition language and stuff like that, it's probably not super attractive to existing vendors with a bunch of users, but is I still think potentially really useful for the kind of the sea of like small open source projects that are like the little language specific open source projects and all of the 5 billion like internal feature flagging systems that are out there. If we can kind of lower the cost for all of those by having a standard kind of like wire protocol, like in the minimum, a standard wire protocol for evaluation. And then on top of that, even better, like a standardized kind of like definition and evaluation engine, which I guess kind of like Unleashed is an example of that, or Yggdrasil is an example of that. I think that's still like really beneficial for all those other kind of players in the ecosystem. I think we might just have to be okay with just saying like this is never going to be something that Unleashed or LaunchDarkly or Split or whoever are kind of super excited by. I think we'd have to like figure out a good messaging to help not confuse all the customers of those vendors, because I totally plus one a lot of like Ryan's comments of like it's going to be really confusing and weird for customers, and yeah, anyway, I that's just a thought. Like it's okay if both those things are true, I think.
Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Ivar, and then I'd like to move concretely into the flag definition discussion. I mean, we've kind of already been there a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder. I think there is another concern, obviously, and that is around innovation, because obviously standardization is good when kind of innovation is done. The challenge is obviously if there is room for more innovation, and obviously we think there are as a vendor, there is a lot of things not solved yet, or it can be thought of differently than current vendors do, Unleash included. And the challenge with obviously moving towards a shared standard, a shared protocol, is that we see this from all other industries where we end up with standardization, is that it makes innovation harder, because obviously suddenly you have to go through that committee on getting changes in there. And I think kind of the suggestion there to have kind of supporting kind of common use cases, at least we see that we have a lot of customers migrating off their own homebrew solution. And what we tend to see is that their capabilities are usually very limited in terms of how advanced targeting you can do. That the configuration you can do is usually quite straightforward. And maybe there is a room for kind of even like Unleash could support like a shared protocol type of mode. If you enable that, you will not be able to do fancy targeting, but you could do kind of what the protocol support. But and it could be very valuable for certain use cases, particularly migrating off your homegrown solution or migrating between vendors. But then when you need kind of those more advanced capabilities, maybe that's when you need a vendor-specific SDK and vendor-specific functionality. Because if we are going to support any future needs that we don't know about today, it would need a lot of hooks, a lot of verbosity into the protocol, which can actually make it not scalable over time.
I mean, philosophically, I agree with your point. On the other hand, I'd like to offer the counterpoint that standardization also allows for innovation in some respects. I mean, the standard, for instance, that we've developed with OpenFeature, one of the things that we've gotten out of it is hooks, which make integrations, creative integrations, very trivially easy and shareable. So especially in terms of like getting interesting telemetry and stuff like that out of feature flag systems. But I see your point. I think it's valid. Conrad?
Yeah, I guess I'll just echo Ivar and Ryan's point where like I think the flag definition language seems really compelling, but if you think about it, if you just mean that everyone uses the same provider, now like a lot of the implementation of all the vendors like ends up being collapsed into one definition, and now like anything that's special or anything that's slightly different now doesn't really work if it is done SDK side. And there might be more than just evaluation, right? There might be sending some telemetry data that's specific to how Launchdarkly or Unleash or another company shows things in their product. So if that goes away, then yeah, it is tricky. And yes, so I wonder if the wire protocol is like a lower barrier to entry, because that I take back maybe my earlier statement, or I guess maybe that's similar to my earlier statement, but the wire protocol seems more straightforward because most of the magic happens on the vendor or like the provider's like maybe source of truth side rather than done in the evaluation side locally.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So I'd like to kind of hit on a couple of these points in the flag definition section I have here. And I guess I won't belabor any of them. The first one I think is the one that's most important for me. I'd like to, maybe even before we talk about a POC, I'd like to see some concrete potential unique uses for a flag definition. Like we spent a lot of time here talking about the challenges associated with having a standard flag definition. I guess I'm interested in knowing, beyond just the ability to generate code, which is my second point, and is technically an interesting thing. What does it actually buy people in terms of use cases? What can we actually do with this standardized flag definition? Because SDKs already exist. Like Unleash already has SDKs. Launchdarkly already has SDKs. People don't need to generate these SDKs if they already have SDKs. So I think one of the things I really wanted to get out of this meeting, especially from people who are very interested in the flag definition, is what's a concrete benefit to trying to standardize this, and then can we talk about what those POCs might look like? Like if people were going to dedicate some time to creating something interesting that would prove out this concept and show real technical value and practical value, what might those things look like? So I'll just put that out there, and then I'll pass it on to a couple of people who had their hands up, and you can think about it. Camille?
Yeah, so I think that it is relatively clear how the wire protocol would look like, more or less. But I'd like to understand, I'd like to know how you think about the flag evaluation language, because I believe that we might look at it like I see two different versions of that. One is like high-level human readable language that might indeed be quite limiting and might be quite complex. But on the other end of the spectrum, there is something closer to a bytecode, rather low-level machine readable language, which might be very expressive and potential, it might be easier for it wouldn't be limiting innovation so much. So I'm wondering how you all think about this flag definition language in that regard.
Okay, well, will people come up with answers to that? Very good question. I'll give the mic to Mike.
Yeah, just a thought on like some of the, telemetry and some of those other use cases. Like one thing we could consider with this like flag definition is all these parts could be kind of composable. So if you look at like how OpenTelemetry works, like they have different parts you can just plug in. So if we had like a common evaluation engine and a couple of different like sync, components, you could basically just register the ones you need, and then that would make it quite easy to create like whatever vendor provider you want with this like kind of tool chain of pre-made components essentially. Even things like hooks you could register at the component level or at the provider level to grab different telemetry data and whatever. So you wouldn't have to write everything from scratch, but you would have to, in that scenario, kind of bundle it to your liking. So it could be an idea as well.
Ryan?
Yeah, so around the flag definition language and what a person like may view it as, I feel like they're necessarily like so if you have two cases, let's say we have flag definition language, or what one might call a flag definition language, and the other side we write SDKs that just have WASM cores, right? Like I think those are like, if it's a flag definition language, it's probably some definition that is, I don't know if it has to be human readable, but it's some way of encoding rules, clauses, bucketing, and so forth. Versus, yeah, we make the open feature equivalent of WASI, and you make your WASM core SDK, and then you just run it in there, and it has common ways of reporting maybe some things or accessing specific hooks provided by that runtime. That potentially does have a lot of value, but it's also an even different scope of conversation, probably, right? Like, because in that particular case, let's say we have a launch darkly SDK written in Rust. You compile it to WebAssembly. We write an open feature provider that implements the WASI, whatever WASM open feature provider, and then you just run it inside Jenkins. But it also means that now Jenkins has a WASM runtime in it, which is maybe a footprint that somebody might not want in every app, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess that is, I don't know if that fits cleanly into either one of these paradigms, but I do think it is another compelling option that has some similar benefits to what the potential benefits of these are. Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Okay, I'm not trying to end the discussion. I do just want to point out, I do have a PR here in this call to action section, and I want to mention it before the meeting ends. So this is a draft PR, and I believe that anyone should be able to make suggestions. I could be wrong with that. You may need to be an org member to make suggestions. But the idea here is one of the things I'd like to get at this meeting, and I'll summarize what I believe are other conclusions. But one of the things I'd like to get at of this is, if there's people who are interested in dedicating actual time to working on some of this stuff, feel free to add yourself as a maintainer on these teams. And what that means is that you're actually interested in committing some time and code, attending some meetings, and doing some POCs for either one of these subjects. So I have two teams. I have one called, I think, spec evaluation or something like that, and one called spec definition. So one is for an evaluation protocol that we talked about, and one is for flag definition language. And it just means that you're interested in continuing these discussions in some way.
But I think that link is not the right link.
Community. I may have messed up. Yeah, it should be this one. Add new spec in teams. So if you go to the files changed.
Okay.
There's two work groups in here. So I guess the background here is that this is how we manage teams in OpenFeature. So yeah, all you need to do is add your GitHub ID here under either approvers or maintainers. Like I said, feel free to do that if you want. It's just kind of a formal way to say you're interested in continuing these discussions and willing to dedicate some actual time to them. If this is work, if we want to do it some other way, I'm open to that too. But I wanted to get kind of out of this meeting a list of people who would be interested in putting some time into these POCs or discussions. I think the other thing I'd want to say is at least for the flag evaluation wire protocol, the two clear to-dos for me, like where we want to have further discussion, is to find maybe a use case for some kind of hosted application like Jenkins, but not Jenkins. It may be, like Pete's saying, the case that this just simply isn't a good example or a good idea. But I'd like to discuss, I guess, a place where we could clearly experiment with the idea of a wire protocol, an evaluation wire protocol, and actually elucidate if there's any value to it. So if that's not kind of an integration with a hosted application, be it Jenkins or whatever, what might that be? I think if we can't come up with some concrete benefits and POCs to do, there's probably not a whole lot of value in the idea anyway. The other one is to compare these protocols. So the two that at least have been brought up in this meeting is Unleash's Yggdrasil, and then there's also the evaluation protocol that FlagD uses. So we could talk about both those. And correct me if I'm wrong, but anyone from Unleash, but is Yggdrasil both an evaluation protocol and a definition? Is it fair to say that, or no?
I got my hand up, so I'm going to speak because I'm from Unleash and I was the lead engineer on Yggdrasil. So the point of Yggdrasil is purely an evaluation engine. It takes the responses from Unleash, upgrades it to an internal DSL, and executes that. And I'd love to show this off in the next community edition, because I think a lot of the things that people have spoken about today, we've already thought about and taken a stab at solving. Doesn't mean we got it right, but it's definitely there are some interesting conversations here.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. I'm really interested to see. Mike, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I didn't want to talk over you, but if could you share any, like, if you had that slide deck? I know we didn't have time to really go through it today, but if you're willing to share it without like presenting it, I guess I would like to take a look at it, and then hopefully at maybe the next community meeting you could talk through it. If it doesn't make sense without the context, then maybe
together, to be honest. So
okay.
I was intending to talk over it, so it might not make a lot of sense without without the
okay. No worries. I guess we'll wait, but I'm definitely curious to see what you've been up to.
Yeah, I'd love to unpack it a little bit with you folks, because I think there's lots of good ideas going around, and we're definitely thinking very similar things.
Are there any like presentations or like things that we like pre-reading or pre-watching that we could do to kind of like get up to speed on it before? It's fine if there's not, but just if there are.
Honestly, probably not.
Okay.
Even though we do have this running in production, it is still a very experimental project, and I don't think the documentation's up to the point where I would put an inexperienced person on it.
Got it.
But yeah, I'm super keen to join next week and talk about it. So maybe we can do it then.
Okay, well, I guess the other takeaway then is we'll add that to the agenda for next week, and we'll give you or whoever from Unleash wants to take the helm on that one. We'll give you the first item on the list. I'm also happy to like mention it in the Slack channel and blog about it if you'd like, just so we can draw as much attention as possible. I mean, I think it's very interesting, so I'm excited to hear more about it. Stacy?
I was just thumbs upping that comment.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I misread the yellow emoji. Okay. Well, we're just about at time. So yeah, I mean, this was only a 1 hour meeting, and there was a lot of good ideas thrown around. I really hope that we can take some of these ideas and if we see value in them, convert them to actionable issues in GitHub. Feel free to continue the discussion on the OpenFeature Slack channel. I'll at least for myself revisit this PR to see if anybody has said that they want to be part of these teams. I don't want to spam people's email inboxes or spam people on Slack if they're not interested in and contributing in some way to this project. Yeah, and I don't know if anybody else has any ideas, anything else they want to share in the last couple of minutes. Okay. I look forward to seeing you all on the Slack channel. And also, the other thing I should mention, I guess, in that same PR, I also added a comment where you can add yourself to our OpenFeature organization just without any maintainership or interest in this specific effort for specifying, either a wire protocol or a flag definition. But you can add yourself to our organization just by putting your GitHub ID on that third file there, or I think it's org.yaml, and you'll get an invite to the org if you're not there already. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Meet you all, folks. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Yep. Bye.